All right, so today let's take a deep dive into something pretty interesting, I think.
Yeah.
The electric vehicle market. Everyone's always talking about Europe and the US, right?
Yeah.
But there's this whole other area that's becoming a major player, and nobody's really paying attention.
Right.
Southeast Asia.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? While everyone is focused on what's happening in the West, Southeast Asia is emerging as a really key region in this whole EV transition.
Exactly.
And it's arguably, I think, the most developed among developing markets.
Yeah, and we've got a ton of sources here, reports, analyses, news articles, all kind of pointing to this trend. So what we're going to do today is we're going to extract like the most important information from these sources for you so you can consider this deep dive as your shortcut to becoming an expert on the topic.
Yeah, and you should care about this because it's not just some far-off trend. What's happening in Southeast Asia with EVs has ripple effects on everything. We're talking global trade, climate goals, maybe even the kind of cars you're going to be driving in a few years.
Okay, so let's set the scene a little bit. The sources keep mentioning that Southeast Asia is the most developed among developing markets.
Right.
What does that actually mean in the context of EVs? And how does it make this region different from, let's say, Africa or South America?
Okay, so think of it this way. Southeast Asia has seen like really rapid economic growth over the past few decades. You've got these huge cities like Jakarta, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh City.
Bustling cities.
Right alongside rural areas that are still using motorbikes as their main form of transportation. This mix of like cutting edge development with those traditional ways of life makes Southeast Asia kind of unique compared to other regions like Africa or South America.
So it's a blend of the old and the new all happening at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of new, one thing that really jumps out from all these sources is this huge surge in EV demand in Southeast Asia.
Oh, yeah.
Some of these numbers are insane.
Absolutely. Triple-digit growth in EV sales. Some reports say there's an increase of almost 900% year on year. I mean, it's unbelievable.
900%. That's incredible. What's driving that kind of demand?
Well, a few things are kind of converging here. First, you've got a rising middle class with more disposable income. They've got more money to spend, and they're looking for better, more modern transportation. And then you have governments stepping in with some pretty sweet incentives to encourage people to go electric. We're talking tax breaks, subsidies, all that good stuff.
So there's a real push from governments to make EVs more appealing.
Exactly. And then, of course, you can't ignore the elephant in the room, the crazy cost of gasoline.
Right. And Southeast Asia relies so heavily on imported fuel, so those price increases hit them even harder.
Exactly. One of the articles we have actually tells the story of a guy named Sathapat in Bangkok. He switched to a Chinese-made EV and is now saving 2/3 on his fuel costs.
Wow.
It really highlights how the economics of EVs are becoming so attractive, especially in a region where gas prices are all over the place.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of how this EV trend is impacting people like at a personal level. It's not just some abstract idea, it's changing lives. And speaking of China, that brings us to another key takeaway from these sources. Chinese brands are absolutely dominating the EV market in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, they really caught a lot of people off guard. While everybody's focused on Tesla and the competition, Chinese brands like BYD, MG, Geely have quietly taken over a huge part of the market in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, the numbers are wild. One report says that in just 1 year, China's EV market share in the region jumped from 38% to almost 75%. I mean, how did that happen?
That's pretty remarkable. Well, China's domestic EV success is a big factor. For years, they've had these supportive policies, subsidies, and a real focus on building their own EV industry. This has given them a huge advantage in terms of technology manufacturing, cost competitiveness.
Yeah.
They've basically refined their products and their strategies in a rapidly growing home market. So now they're prepared for global expansion.
So they kind of use their home market as a testing ground to become global players.
Pretty much. And then on top of that, you have those trade tensions between China and the West. All those tariffs imposed by the US and EU actually pushed Chinese EV makers to focus even more on Southeast Asia as a market where they're welcome. It's like they were forced to pivot, and now they're reaping the rewards.
Interesting. So it's like an unintended consequence of all that geopolitical maneuvering.
Exactly. And the results are clear. BYD actually overtook Tesla as the world's top-selling EV brand last year. That's a pretty big shift in the global landscape.
Huge. And it's not just about selling cars either. These sources point to a massive wave of investment Factories are being built, supply chains established, a whole EV ecosystem is being created from scratch.
That's right. We're seeing billions of dollars going into Southeast Asia. And it's not just about making a quick buck. These Chinese companies are in it for the long haul. They're betting on the region becoming a global EV manufacturing powerhouse.
So they're not just looking to sell cars, they want to build the whole industry there.
Yeah, and the governments in Southeast Asia are totally on board with this vision. They see it as a way to create jobs, boost their economies, become key players in this whole global tech shift.
So it's a win-win for everyone involved. Any specific examples of these investments?
Oh, tons. BYD is building a massive $1.3 billion factory in Indonesia. Geely, another Chinese giant, is partnering with Proton in Malaysia for a $10 billion deal. And those are just a couple of examples. There are countless others all over the region.
Wow, that's a serious commitment.
It is. And it shows that this isn't just some passing fad. It's a fundamental shift in how the global auto industry is being structured. And for Southeast Asia, it's an amazing opportunity to be a leader in the future of mobility.
It makes you wonder how this will all play out.
For sure.
Yeah.
And it's not just about China either. While they're leading the charge now, these sources also highlight how other international brands are trying to compete in this fast-growing market.
All right, so let's talk about the competition. It's not just a one-sided game, right? I did see something about a Hyundai buyer in Kuala Lumpur, so other brands are in the mix.
Oh, absolutely. You've got Japanese, Korean, American, even European brands, all fighting for a piece of the pie. They're all trying to figure out how to compete in this crazy dynamic market.
So what are some of their strategies? Are they just playing catch-up at this point?
Well, some are definitely behind when it comes to EV technology, but they're not just sitting back. Some brands, like the Japanese automakers, are really leaning on their brand loyalty and their reputation for making reliable cars. They've been in Southeast Asia for a long time, and they're hoping that will give them an advantage.
So brand recognition and trust are still huge factors.
Yeah, for sure. Others, like Hyundai, are focusing on specific parts of the market. They're offering a wider range of EVs at different price points so they can reach a broader audience.
So it's like they're each trying to find their own little niche within this whole EV boom.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's Tesla. They have a certain level of brand appeal, and they're seen as a tech leader, so they're hoping to use that to their advantage.
So it's a pretty interesting mix of strategies, all happening in this really fast-growing competitive market. It makes you wonder what the EV landscape will look like in Southeast Asia in 5 or 10 years.
That's the million-dollar question. Honestly, It's too early to know for sure, but one thing is certain, it's going to be a wild ride.
All right, so we've talked about the demand, the trends, China's role, the competition heating up. But these sources also zoom in on one country in particular, Thailand. Why does Thailand seem to be like the center of all this EV activity?
Thailand is really setting themselves up as the epicenter of the Southeast Asian EV boom. They're aiming for 30% of their vehicle production to be electric by 2030. That's a pretty big goal. And they have a lot going for them.
Like, what makes Thailand so attractive for EV investment?
Well, first of all, they already have a strong auto manufacturing base. They've been a major car producer for decades, so they've got the infrastructure, the skilled workers, the supply chains all in place.
So they're not starting from zero. They're building on what they already have.
Exactly. And they also have a strategic location for exporting to the rest of the region. Thailand's right in the heart of Southeast Asia.
So it's a gateway to the broader market.
Exactly. And then you have the government. They've been so proactive in supporting the EV industry. They're offering tax breaks, import duty reductions, subsidies, you name it.
Yeah, one report laid out all those policies, and it's pretty impressive. They're really going all in on EVs.
Oh, yeah. And it's working. We're seeing a ton of EV investment flowing into Thailand, particularly from China.
So it sounds like Thailand is like a microcosm of everything we've been talking about. The high demand China's influenced the investment boom and that fierce competition.
Exactly. It's a real-world example of how this global EV race is playing out at a regional level. And what we learn here, the strategies that work, the policies that are successful, all of that will impact other developing markets as they start their own EV journeys.
It's amazing to see how all this is unfolding, and it really makes you realize this EV revolution isn't just a Western thing. It's a global phenomenon. And Southeast Asia is leading the charge.
Yeah, it really is. And this kind of brings up a big point that often gets missed with all this talk about economics and market share.
You mean like the environmental impact?
Exactly. We've been focused on all the forces shaping EVs in Southeast Asia, like the money and the politics, but what about sustainability?
Right, because one of the big selling points of EVs is they're supposed to be good for the environment, help us fight climate change.
Exactly. But that's where things get a little complicated. On the one hand, this move towards EVs in Southeast Asia could be huge for the planet, especially if it means getting rid of all those old gas guzzlers that are everywhere over there.
Right. But there's got to be downsides, too. Like, it can't be all good news, right?
Of course not. For example, where does the electricity to charge all those EVs come from?
Good point.
In Southeast Asia, a lot of their energy still comes from burning coal. So if your EV is running on electricity from coal, it's not really helping the environment that much.
So it's not enough to just switch to EVs.
Yeah.
The whole energy system needs to get cleaner, too.
Yeah, totally. And then there's the issue of the batteries. Mining the materials, manufacturing them, shipping them all over the place, and eventually even throwing them away. All of that has a pretty big environmental impact.
So how do you balance the economic good stuff of this EV boom with the need to make it green?
That's the big question, isn't it? And it's something everyone's thinking about right now. Governments, industry leaders, even everyday people buying these cars.
Sounds like there's no easy answer.
Not really, but there are some good things happening. Some countries in the region are investing a lot in renewable energy, like solar and wind. That's a step in the right direction.
Makes sense. What about the batteries themselves? Anything new happening there to make them better for the planet?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of research going on. Like solid-state batteries, which are supposed to be more efficient and don't need as many of those rare earth minerals.
So it sounds like there are definitely challenges.
Mm.
But there are also opportunities to make this EV boom more sustainable, right?
Exactly. And that's why it's important to talk about this stuff. To understand how complicated it is and to push for solutions that are good for both the economy and the environment. It doesn't have to be one or the other.
Well said. Okay, so shifting gears a bit, I want to talk about this idea of Southeast Asia becoming like a manufacturing hub for EVs, not just a place that buys them.
Right, that's a key part of this whole thing. Like we talked about, Chinese companies are pouring tons of money into building factories and setting up those complex supply chains over there. And it's not just about meeting the local demand, it's about making Southeast Asia a global leader in EV manufacturing.
So they're taking what worked in China and applying it on an even bigger scale.
Exactly, and it makes sense strategically. Southeast Asia has a lot going for it when it comes to manufacturing. A young and growing workforce, labor costs are lower than in the West. They have access to those key raw materials like nickel and cobalt that are needed for batteries, and it's in a perfect location to export to other markets around the world.
So it's like they have everything they need already.
Pretty much. And the governments there are totally on board. They're making it easy for these companies to invest, offering tax breaks, making regulations simpler, investing in infrastructure to support the growth.
So it seems like everyone wins. Investments lead to jobs, the economy gets stronger, and these Southeast Asian countries become more important players in the global auto industry.
It has the potential to be really positive, but we can't ignore the potential downsides either.
Like, what if they become too dependent on China for this whole industry?
Exactly. That's something people are worried about and something the governments are thinking about too. The key, I think, is finding a balance. Welcome the investment, but also encourage innovation within their own countries and make sure the benefits are shared fairly. It's about building a sustainable system, not just relying on one big player.
So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Right, and make sure everyone in Southeast Asia benefits, not just a small group of people.
Okay, so that leads us to another interesting part of this whole story. The role of governments in shaping the EV landscape.
Oh, the governments are super important. Without their support policies, incentives, and investment in infrastructure, the EV market just won't grow.
And we've seen that in the success stories so far, like in Thailand. Governments have been really active.
Yeah, they're giving tax breaks and subsidies to people who buy EVs, putting in charging stations and other infrastructure, setting big goals for how many EVs they want to see on the road.
And it seems to be working. The reports we have showed how Thailand's EV sales and investments have gone way up since they started these policies.
It just goes to show how powerful government policies can be. And it's not just about giving people rewards either. Sometimes you need to be a little tougher.
You mean like regulations?
Exactly. Some governments are thinking about stricter emission standards for gas-powered cars, charges for driving those cars in city centers, or even banning the sale of new gas-powered cars completely at some point in the future. That's a big step.
Wow, so they're really serious about this transition.
They have to be. The stakes are high for both the economy and the environment. The choices governments make now will determine what the EV market looks like for years to come.
And it's not just individual countries, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those sources also mention ASEAN, that's the Association of Southeast Asian Nations.
Right, ASEAN is working on creating an EV ecosystem for the whole region. That means making regulations more consistent between countries, encouraging trade of EVs and parts between those countries, and even working together on research and development.
So it's happening on multiple levels: national policies, regional cooperation, and even global partnerships, all working together to make this EV thing happen.
Yeah, it's a really interesting example of how governments can push for change and innovation. But we can't forget that behind all the numbers and the policies, there are real people whose lives are being affected by this.
Right. We haven't really talked about the social side of things yet.
It's super important to remember that this isn't just about factories and batteries. It's about people's lives, their jobs, their communities.
So how is this shift to EVs going to affect people in Southeast Asia on a day-to-day basis?
It's tough to say for sure, and the answers will be different for different people. For some, EVs are a chance to improve their lives. They can get cleaner, quieter, more modern transportation.
And for people who depend on driving for their jobs, like taxi drivers, delivery people, or rideshare drivers,
Yeah,
the lower costs of running an EV could be a big deal.
absolutely. But there are also possible downsides. Some people could lose their jobs in the traditional car industry, like in factories or repair shops.
That's a good point. And what about the cost of EVs? They're still pretty expensive compared to gas cars. Will everyone be able to afford them, or will it just be something for rich people?
That's a real concern and something governments need to think about carefully. If they want everyone to switch to EVs, they need to be affordable for normal people, not just the wealthy. Otherwise, it could make inequality even worse.
So it's about making sure everyone benefits from this EV transition, not just a few.
Exactly. And it's about looking at the big picture, considering not just the economy and the environment, but also what it means for society. It's about making sure this change leads to a better future for everyone in Southeast Asia.
So we've really covered a lot of ground, haven't we? This whole EV revolution in Southeast Asia. It's a pretty complex story.
We have, yeah. From all those crazy sales numbers to China's big moves, the environmental stuff, and even how it's going to affect people's lives.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting deep dive. So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What do we want them to remember?
I think the most important thing is that Southeast Asia is not some minor player in this whole global EV thing. It's a big deal. A fast-growing market that's attracting tons of investment and could become a major manufacturing center. This isn't just a small trend, it's a huge shift happening right now.
While China's definitely the big player right now, it's not a done deal. There's still room for other brands to compete, especially since governments in the region want a more diverse and sustainable EV market.
Exactly. And it's not just about the economics and the technology either. We have to remember the environmental and social side of things. We need to make sure this shift to EVs benefits everyone in Southeast Asia, not just a few, and that it helps create a cleaner, more sustainable future for the whole region.
So it's not just about making money, it's about building a better future.
Exactly. And that brings me to my final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
We talked a lot about what's happening with EVs in Southeast Asia and how it's happening, but the big question is why? Why should any of this matter to our listeners?
Yeah, why does it matter?
Because this is about more than just cars. It's about the future of transportation, the future of energy, the future of Southeast Asia itself, and really the future of the planet. Everything that's happening there, the investments, the policies, all of it's going to have a big impact beyond just Southeast Asia. It'll affect global trade, climate change goals, and even the cars we'll all be driving in a few years. It's all connected. So stay informed, stay curious, and stay involved. The future of how we get around is being shaped right now, and it's a future we're all part of.
That's a great point to end on. Thanks for walking us through this deep dive. It's been eye-opening. And to everyone listening, we hope this has got you thinking about this EV revolution happening in Southeast Asia. Keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep thinking critically about the world around you. Until next time.